Welcome to the Science of Tree Felling series. In this video, we are going to be talking about emergency response preparedness. This is a concept of thinking about how to get ourselves out of a situation before we would ever encounter a situation. This makes sense in a concept that I like to talk about in a function of when is the worst time to wonder where the fire extinguisher is? When there's a fire. So a little bit of preparation on the front end before we go out into the woods can potentially make a very bad situation a little less severe. So let's talk about some things that we should consider before we go out in the woods. First, I always like to emphasize never working alone. Now, that is not always practical. Sometimes it's just necessary to go out in the woods alone, but in doing so, we put ourselves at higher risk. If we get injured, there's nobody there to hear us if we're crying for help. So we're going to put a few things in play that could potentially help us in that situation. But whenever possible, try to work in small groups or at least in pairs. So if you need something, there's somebody within earshot or easy communication distance so that you can get the help that you need as quickly as possible. Now, if you have to work alone in the woods, then you're going to have to think a little bit harder and put in some more preparatory work, including making sure you have good communication with somebody who you can count on to be responsive in case of a situation, knowing where you are. As I'm making these videos, I'm going out into the woods and I'm cutting things alone, just with me and the camera, which is fine, but now I'm away from my phone potentially. So before I ever go into the woods alone, I always make it a priority to let my wife know where I'm going, specifically in the woods, not just in the woods, but where in the woods will she be able to find me, and what the expectation of how long I'm going to be out for and when she should plan for me to be returning. Now, this makes sense that if I get into a situation where I'm pinned or unable to get to my phone or unable to communicate, she'll know at a certain point in time to come looking for me. And that can be the difference between life and death. So first of all, make sure that you communicate with somebody who can respond and tell them your location, your specific location, where in the woods specifically will they be able to find you, and an expectation of time to expect you back. And if they don't find you at that time, to come looking for you. Now, if you do have access to your cell phone, which most people do nowadays, check, depending on your location, whether you have service. I found myself in plenty of locations that don't have cell phone reception, and that's going to make for a hard day if I need help. If I go to my phone and I try to dial 911 and I have no service, that's going to be a big issue because help won't come. In those kinds of situations, other two-way communication devices such as radios are going to be extremely helpful. But again, don't just rely on the concept of a radio. Test the radio. Hit the button, check in with the person communicating on the other end, make sure that the battery is good on your cell phone and or your radio. Make sure that it's going to last the entire time that you're out. Should you get into a situation you don't want to have your batteries dying. But can you easily communicate in a situation either directly through a cell phone or through a two-way communication device, and having somebody on the other end having good reception to be able to communicate to first responders and emergency services. Communicate your location. Do you know where you are? A lot of times in urban areas, I find myself kind of getting turned around. So I like to note the location where I currently am. Is it easily accessible? So in an urban area, I have an address. If you're calling emergency services, an address is going to be a quick and easy way for them to get to you. Now, if you are in the woods and deep within the woods, it's going to be much more difficult for them to access you, let alone understanding where you are in, let's say, 1,600 acres of woods. So in that particular case, before you head into the woods, you want to communicate and have a agreed upon location that's easily accessible by EMS services, or just a location, a meeting point, a waypoint that's agreed upon, that if a situation happens, all parties will be able to gather there, and that's where the emergency response will be able to take place. So coming up with an agreed upon location, sometimes this can be a refueling location, but preferably something that's close to a roadway or an access point that's easily accessible by vehicle. If you brought your own vehicle to the woods or another situation, and you're working in pairs and there's only one vehicle between the two of you, it's important to communicate who has the keys and where they're located. In most situations, when I'm in the woods, I'm going to leave the keys with the vehicle, and before we head out, all members of that party know exactly where those keys are if they need to use them in an emergency situation. Also, I'm going to have that vehicle turned around and pointed out. Time is of the essence if there's an emergency situation. Every second counts. And if you're having to go back and forth and making a 32-point turn to try to get that vehicle turned around to head towards emergency facilities, that precious time is ticking away. So before you leave your vehicle, make sure that everybody knows where the keys are and that that vehicle is pointed out and away so that if necessary, they can put the keys in, turn it on, and start moving immediately. Additionally, you don't want to be thinking about where you're going. In an emergency situation, your brain is already frazzled. Maybe there's blood, maybe somebody's screaming. It's going to help you out if you can think about all these factors beforehand. So having a GPS or your cell phone already locked in and engaged into the nearest emergency response location. Where is the nearest hospital? How far away is it? How do you get there? Is access limited in any way, shape, or form? Is there a bridge out, road construction, anything like that? And how long is it going to take you to get to that location in the best case scenario? Again, every second counts, especially when we're dealing with chainsaw injuries. So put your GPS either on your phone or if you have a standalone GPS in your vehicle, make sure that it's locked in and engaged and you review those instructions before you go out into the woods. So if anything happens, you at least have an idea of how to get there. Again, these are for remote locations in wooded areas where EMS and emergency services won't easily be able to access you. You'll need to get to a location where they can, and or get yourself or whoever you're working with to the nearest hospital as quickly as you can. Okay, should a emergency situation occur in the woods, there's some preparatory things that we can do to make the situation at least a little bit better. First aid kits are required by OSHA anytime that you're working for hire in just about every industry. And having a first aid kit is a great idea. However, something like a contractor's first aid kit, the items in here are great for minor scrapes, bumps, and bruises. They're good for little boo-boos, but they are not going to do anything for you in the case of a chainsaw incident. Chainsaws are not designed to cut. Chainsaws are designed to remove material. They create what's called a kerf. So it's a gap between the wood that's being cut out and removed. Now, if chainsaws are designed to cut and remove wood, what do you think it's going to do to your soft, fleshy bits and even your less dense bone? It's going to cut and remove. And that's a different type of injury than what a standard first aid kit is designed to work with. So we need to consider that. Over the years, have developed this trauma kit that is waterproof. It's in a Pelican case or any other type of variety of hard plastic case. And it's sealed out from the elements. So even if it starts raining, I don't have to worry about the contents of this going bad or spoiling. But inside of it, and it should be checked regularly and brought out into the woods, maybe at that meeting place with you, if not brought to the job site exactly where you're tree felling, we're going to have things in here that's designed for chainsaw incidents. We're going to have gauze, we're going to have a lot of bandaging, and most important is a tourniquet and knowing how to use that tourniquet. If you don't know how to use a tourniquet and you just have one, that's okay, but it's best to review how to use a tourniquet properly before you should ever need one. The gauze is extremely important here because, again, like I said, chainsaws aren't going to cut, they're going to remove material, which means you have a gap now that has to be filled. You can't just hold pressure onto it. You need to pack and shove clean material into that hole that was created to try to stop the bleeding. So in combination with a tourniquet, you will want as much gauze as you can get a hold of and have available to jam into that wound to try to get that blood to stop flowing. So having a kit like this is extremely important. Check it often, make sure that nothing is expired. Now, on my person, while I'm working in the woods, I have my forestry belt here that contains a lot of items that are useful for me to have on my person. But most importantly, always right next to me is this little first aid kit. Inside the first aid kit, like I just got done mentioning, the two most important things that I've found to be useful in case of an emergency with a chainsaw incident is a bunch of gauze to stuff the wound, and a tourniquet to try to reduce the amount of blood flow. These two things are critically important and should be available and on your person because, again, having a first aid kit is great at a centralized location for everybody to get to, but having one on your person is going to reduce that time till we start receiving our first aid. So these are some things to consider before we even start going into the woods, before we even start talking about our tree felling plan, which is what we're going to come up with next. So with that, thanks for listening. Be safe. Thank you for watching the Science of Tree Felling series. My hope is that you find these videos educational and that you learn to be a better, safer tree feller. If you know others who may benefit from this series, share the link, like the video, and subscribe to this channel. Keep watching for even more tree felling knowledge. See you next time.